Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Frans Kroese and I'm the host of today's lecture. And it's a lecture by Lauren Brent. And Lauren is an evolutionary biologist. And she kicks off the mini-series on friendship. And Lauren studied biology in Canada. And she received her PhD in the UK, and that's where she still lives partly. So, because part of her job is not only in the UK, at the University of Exeter, but also in Duke. So she's actually commuting more or less between the United States and England. Yeah? In the United States, she's studying whales, and in the UK, she's studying monkeys. Well, not monkeys in the UK, but at another beautiful location, as you will see. Yeah. And her work focuses on animals that live in groups, and she is collecting data for long periods of time, and she is very interested in the social networks. And she's not only watching at it, but she is also looking at the biology of friendship, and that is today's topic. And that's central in her study, biology of friendship. And friendship is, as you will see, not something that's exclusive to humans, but also animals can show friendship. And why is that? What are the benefits of friendship? What are the biochemical and genetic pathways that are involved? Yeah, we will hear about it. And her work is very relevant and very much also appreciated by a broader public. Recently, she published a paper in the New Scientist. That's quite something. And you can see her on YouTube on a TEDx talk. Yeah? And there are also documentaries with her, yeah, on the television networks. So that is, if you Google her, you can see all these movies. But today, she's going to talk a live lecture. Yeah? And she will talk about the biology of friendship, and the title of her lecture is The Evolution of Friendship and What Other Animals Can Teach Us About Human Relationships. We are all very curious to hear what we can learn. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Is it okay if I don't use the microphone? Because I'll probably also have to just water. I usually shout, so I should be loud enough anyway. Okay, let's just save my voice anyway. Whew. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure, my first time in Groningen, so it's a pleasure to be here. What I want to talk to you about today is, well, as we heard, the evolution of friendship, but I want to start off with talking about the idea that humans are a bit weird. Or at least we like to think that we're a bit weird, right? We seem to think that we're strange compared to other animals, that we're special, we're really unique. Is it going to work? Yeah. So here are humans doing a bunch of human-ish activities in big social groups that we tend to think of as uniquely human, uniquely special to human behavior. But in order to understand how people are different from other animals, we have to first learn to understand how we're the same. And we have this whole list of things that we think are unique to humans, but we've shown over the years, scientists, biologists studying other animals have shown that this list actually is much shorter than we might like to think. So the first of these is humans use tools. We thought for a very long time that we were the only species that used tools, and of course now we know that this isn't true. So chimpanzees and crows up here take sticks off trees and they strip the leaves off of the sticks. So they modify this tool and they use it to extract insects or termites from the environment. Dolphins down here in the corner take sponges and they put them on their nose, and they use this when they're hunting, when they're going along the seabed to protect their nose from getting damaged. They're very sensitive skin. And then capuchin monkeys use anvils and hammers to crack open nuts. And even lowly invertebrates, this octopus up here, will take a coconut shell and use it as a protective home when he's being attacked by predators, and will even use it to roll along the seabed floor. So other animals use tools. Other animals also have culture. So we think of culture as a uniquely human thing, but no, other animals also have it. So orca whales, killer whales, and even starlings have different dialects depending on what population you're looking at. So they all speak a similar-ish language, but just like in the Netherlands, you can tell if somebody's from the north or from the south based on how they sound. You can also tell this in killer whales and in different species of birds. And then we have in primates, tool use varies within species. So some Japanese macaques use the hot spring onsen baths, but other populations that have access to those baths don't use them. And some chimpanzees crack nuts the way capuchins do, but other chimpanzees that live in the environment where they have access to nuts and rocks don't perform this behavior. So other animals have culture. What about, though, the topic of today's lecture? What about friendship? Is this a unique thing that humans do, or do we see it in other animals? So a lot of people argue, and have argued, or have thought at least, that friendship is uniquely human. So we have this quote from, it's one of my favorite novels actually, it's called Things Fall Apart by the Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. And he says at some point in this novel, "We are better than animals because we have kinsmen. So an animal rubs its itching flank against a tree, whereas a man asks his kinsman to scratch him." And what I want to do today is I want to show you that this quote is wrong, that other animals do indeed have friendship, and that actually by understanding those relationships in other animals, we can really gain a greater understanding of our own biology and of ourselves. Right. So to do that, well, first of all, I've been studying non-human animals for the last 10 years and have gained a lot of knowledge and information about them from my own research and from the research of others. But before we get into that, the first thing we have to do really is to define friendship. If I'm going to argue that other animals have it, I better well define it. But friendship's one of those tricky things. We all know what it is, right? We all have friends. We all think we know what it is, but if I ask you to define it in really strict terms, it gets a bit difficult. So my definition of friendship is that friends are individuals who engage in bidirectional, so reciprocal, affiliative, which is a word for, well, it's kind of a word for friendly, but pro-social, so non-aggressive, non-reproductive interactions, and do so at a frequency that distinguishes them from non-friends. And they also have to do this consistently over time. So basically, friends engage in affiliative, pro-social interactions with each other fairly often, and it's not just a one-off. They do this over some considerable amount of time. They'll do it over and over again. And affiliative interactions in humans, at least, can be everything from talking to each other, sending an email, giving each other a hug. You can think of and list a whole number of different types of interactions. So that's how we define friendship, but you might be thinking now, well, is friendship important? Why should I care about this topic? So if we think just about the modern world in general and social media sites and how everyone seems to be using them, I think it is quite apparent that sociality pervades our modern landscape, and these sites really make us very aware how connected we are to everybody else in our social world. And I think probably many of you, like myself, are guilty of spending quite a lot of time on these sites looking at pictures of other individuals, reading your Twitter feeds of our colleagues and friends. And this is time we probably could be spending doing something more productive, right? But it goes further than that. Our obsession for social information goes not just beyond us wasting our time, but we also spend our money on things like celebrity magazines, right? So millions of euros are spent on these types of magazines every year. And really, if you think about it, people are paying money to learn social information about people who they've never met and are probably never, ever going to meet. So if I were an economist, I would probably say this is quite irrational behavior, but it really shows you that our root of craving for social information is really quite strong and deep. So why do we do this? Well, if you were a social psychologist, you would say, well, we do this, we're interested in social behavior And we have these social relationships because the more embedded we are in society, the more connected we are to the social world, then the happier and healthier that we will be. But is this actually true? And if so, how does the relationship between social connections and health, for example, come about? And this is where I think the study of other animals in particular can help us, because we can look at other animals and their social relationships and start to parse out the biology underlying some of these relationships. Okay, so a bit about me and my research. So currently I'm studying, you can see the tiny little fin poking out of the water in the middle picture in blue, killer whales off of Washington State in the United States. But the majority of my work, and what I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about today when it comes to my own research anyway, is my work on non-human primates. And in particular, I study one species of primate, which is called the Rhesus Macaque. So it's an old world monkey originally from Southeast and Southern Asia. So where I study these monkeys is a bit funny. So as I just said, they're originally from Southeast Asia and, Southeast and Southern Asia. But I study them in the Caribbean. So there's a small island off the coast of Puerto Rico where in 1938, a scientist by the name of C.R. Carpenter took 400 monkeys from India and he brought them over on a boat. And he deposited them on this island so that he was an American, he wanted a research station with monkeys on it closer to home so we could start to learn about the lives of these gregarious, complicated animals. So the descendants of that original founding population have been there ever since. So they're still on this island 75 years later. And we've learned quite a bit about their biology, myself and others who've studied them over the years. So we can follow them. So this is just an example to my research assistants following one of our study groups of individuals. I was going to show you a video of the island. It's a bit gratuitous, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. But we had a bit of a problem with the video, so I'm just going to exit PowerPoint and show it to you this way. So it's just an aerial shot. It's a very tiny island just off the coast of Puerto Rico, surrounded by mangrove forests and reefs. And to date, about 1,000 individual monkeys live on the island. And there are some human-based structures, but no one lives on the island with the individuals, so they're just monkeys alone living on this island. They basically are born and interact with who they want when they want, breed with who they want when they want, and they'll die on the island also. So that was supposed to be the video. So here's just a still shot of the aerial to show you that these monkeys live in large social groups that have both males and females in them. And for most of my study, there have been 6 social groups on the island. So we can overlay their home ranges. They overlap quite a bit, but they stay in the same social group. You'll see them travel together, and when they encounter another group that isn't their own, they'll often behave aggressively towards them. And what's important to know is that females in particular stay in their group their entire lives. So these females can live upwards of 25, 26, 27 years, and that entire time they're staying in the same group with the same individuals. And this includes both individuals to whom they're closely related and individuals to whom they're not related at all. So there's great opportunity for them to interact repeatedly over time with a large number of animals. All right, so this is where I was going to show you another video. This time, a bit more informative because I want to show you a clip. It's a short clip of the individuals just sort of engaging in their day-to-day behaviors and interactions on the island. So here are members of one of the social groups that I study, and they're simply traveling. There's a little land strip connects 2 parts of the island to each other, so you can see the ocean in the background. So they're traveling together as a group from one area to the next. And the thing I want to point out to you while you watch this is that as a researcher who's followed these individual monkeys for quite a lot of time, is that I can recognize them as individuals. And this is mostly based on their facial features, but actually once you get used to recognizing animals as individuals, I can see a monkey 100 meters away, and just by their gait, I know who it is, often just by the way they walk. And they all have individual identities, so they all have a name. It's a bit of a strange party trick, admittedly. So here we're going to see 42L, for example, is her name. She's one of my favorites because she's quite big. So what I can do, because I can identify individuals, is that I can follow them around and I can record not only what they're doing. So this female here who's grooming her children, she's called 40L. I can say who she's interacting with and how the outcome of that interaction. So I can record in great detail who these individuals are interacting with and the quality of that interaction. So, you probably noticed in the video that monkeys spend a lot of time grooming each other. So this is when one animal passes their hands through the fur of another, and what they're doing is they're cleaning out any dirt, they're cleaning out any parasites they find in the fur of one another. And what's important about grooming is that grooming is really, in primates anyway, the currency of social relationships. It's the currency of friendship. So it's kind of like a little tiny favor and kind of a you scratch my back, I scratch yours, literally sort of system. So monkeys, although they live in social groups with lots of other individuals, aren't grooming partners with everybody. So they're only grooming partners with a certain number of individuals, and those are often their relatives, but a lot of the time they're also unrelated individuals. So this is the basis of friendship in monkeys. So we have affiliation consistently over time between pairs of individuals, and it's not everybody in a group. You're only doing it with certain individuals and not others. So this fits perfectly with our definition of what friends are. So we see these types of relationships in Rhesus macaques. Oh, wait. Never mind. That's not what I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you there was a video here. That's why I got a bit confused, but we're not going to look at that one. Oh, and this is supposed to be red, but it's kind of blood red. So what I can do is I can take all of the different associations of grooming that I've documented over time in my social group, and I can make a map of those relationships. So what we're looking at here is a social network, but for monkey grooming. So the squares in the network are the females, and the circles are the adult males. And a line connecting a pair of individuals represents the fact that they groomed each other. So you can see right away, not everybody grooms everybody else. And the thickness of the line increases if you groom each other more frequently. So I can put sort of a quality level of a relationship on there. And the important thing to know about this network is some individuals are smack dab in the middle, which means they're more social, they're more integrated into society. And then we have some individuals, these ones over here, for example, not connected to anybody else, which means that during the time that I was studying them, at least, I didn't see them involved in any grooming interactions with anybody else. So they're sort of the loners of the social network, if you like. And we can put more information on the network, so we can make the shapes bigger for the individuals who are more integrated or more connected into society. So we have just a bit more information, who really are the players in terms of affiliative social relationship, who have the most friends. Now, it's not just my work. On Rhesus macaques, these same types of results have been generated for many years now in many different species. So we see what I call differentiated social relationships or social bonds, if I'm being a real biologist, but friendships in everything from chimpanzees to giraffes and hyenas, dolphins, in birds, many species of birds, and even in some species of fish. We have these differentiated relationships, some individuals engaging in affiliative relationships consistently over time with some members of their group, but not everybody. So what's the first thing that this tells us with respect to humans? Well, it might suggest that if other animals other than ourselves have friends, that friendship is the product of evolution. So it's not something we invented using human culture, which is quite powerful. We come up with all sorts of things with it, but friendship doesn't seem to be one of the things that we invented using simply human culture. It seems to be something instead that evolved, because other species have it, right? So the logic for this argument kind of goes like this. If we look at a phylogenetic tree, so how you read this is that species that are more closely related are closer to each other, their branches are closer to each other on the tree. So chimpanzees and humans diverged about 6 million years ago, Rhesus macaques 35 million years ago, and somewhere back in the day there was a common ancestor that probably looked something like a tree shrew. So if humans have friendship, and we know we do, and if I've just argued that other primates, like chimpanzees and Rhesus macaques, also have friendship, then the logical extension of this is that our common ancestor, the common ancestor of at least, let's say, old world primates, so ones that originated in Africa and Asia, also had friendship. So this suggests friendship evolved. It's in our evolutionary history. It's not something newly invented by humans. Keeping along the evolutionary tract, we can talk about the relationship between fitness or friendship and something we call fitness. So in evolutionary terms, fitness is not how strong you are, exactly. It's more to do with your ability to survive and to produce babies that go on to live and create the next generation, and so on. So if something is the product of natural selection, it has to impact upon your ability to survive and reproduce. It has to be related to fitness. So if we see a relationship between any trait, it can be how strong you are, it could be whether or not you have eyes. With fitness, then we know that natural selection is acting upon it. We know it benefits that organism in some way. So what I found in my research in the Rhesus macaques is that individuals who are more embedded in their social networks in terms of how friendly they are have a greater likelihood that their infants will survive to their first year and beyond. If you make it to your first year of life, if you're a monkey, odds are you'll make it to adulthood and become, a reproducer yourself. So it's a pretty good measure of whether or not your offspring are going to make it to the next generation, to be the next generation. So we have this nice linear relationship between how friendly you are in Rhesus macaques and whether or not you will contribute to the next generation. Fitness is also, however, about your own survival. In order to produce babies, you have to be alive. So we know from baboons in the top right-hand corner and also dolphins that being socially connected impacts upon your own survival. So the more connected you are if you're a dolphin and if you're a baboon, increases the likelihood that you yourself will survive to the next year. And then in other animals, like horses and these marmots down here, we see the same sorts of results as the Rhesus macaque. They're better at producing offspring the more connected they are. Okay, so once again, we have evidence to suggest that in other animals, at least friendship is beneficial. Having social relationships, friendly social relationships, leads to reproductive success and survival. Moving away from the sort of pure evolutionary line of argument, we can start to look at the more cognitive and molecular mechanisms that commonly underline friendly relationships in humans and other animals. So, just like people, monkeys are kind of obsessed with social information too. So the Rhesus macaques on the island I study them in Puerto Rico, they don't have any predators, and they get fed actually once a day. So they're not really spending very much time looking out for food. But they still spend a lot of time looking over their shoulder anyway, right? So what are they looking at? Oh, I had one more video that's not going to work that I forgot about. Let's see if I can make it today. Sorry about this. So here we have a female. She's drinking water. Drinking water is important. You need to do it to stay alive. But still, she stops drinking water to look around. She's not looking for food. You can see you can maybe see she's got a bit of food in her mouth already. So she's scanning the environment for social information, we think. It's the only possibility for what she could be doing. And this female walks by. That's not interesting. We don't look up at that. But you're going to see in a second why looking around for social information is pretty important. So here you go. So another female comes along. This female is higher ranking than this one. So she'd better look out for her coming because she has to get out of the way. Because if she doesn't get out of the way, she's in trouble. So this female would be aggressive towards her, presumably. So she has to be looking around to learn about her social environment, to see who's coming. Because it has consequences for her. So monkeys seem to pay attention to things in their environment, to social information in their environment. We can go one step further than that, than just observing them and what they do. We can ask them what they like to look at. So here is, I'm just going to use a pointer here. So here's one of my subjects from the island. And we're showing him an apparatus. And what we're showing him is basically this. So it's a long piece of paper board, basically. And there's one picture on this end and a different picture on this end. And my research assistant here, she's got a video camera and it's trained on the monkey's face. So we can determine at a later point when we're watching back the video which of the two images the monkey was looking at. So does he want to look at this one or does he prefer to look at this one? And when we do that, we can ask them, well, do you want to look at a gray square? Do you want to look at the picture of a monkey who's lower ranking than you? Do you want to look at the picture of a monkey who's higher ranking than you? Or if you're a male monkey, do you want to look at the backside of a female monkey? And the answer is that they want to look at this. They want to look at a dominant male and they want to look at the backside of a female monkey. But they don't just prefer to look at these things, they'll actually pay you to do it. So if you reward them with juice for looking at all of these images, and then you say, okay, if you want to look at these images, you don't get juice. So basically you're giving up your juice reward. They will do that to look at the picture of the dominant male and at the backside of the female monkey. They will pay you to look at those things. So just like humans spending their hard-earned money to look at celebrity magazines, monkeys will pay you to look at social information. What are they doing with this social information? So this study actually just came out 2 weeks ago. This is not my research. It's a fantastic group out of Vienna. So we know in many corvids, so crows and rooks, but particularly ravens, form long-term social bonds. They form pair bonds, actually. So two individuals will get together and they'll have a territory and they have an affiliative relationship over time. And we know from previous work that if you take a pair bond and you split them up, for years, 4, 5, 6 years, when you put them back together, they behave in a manner that suggests that they recognize each other, and they behave in a manner that is different than how they act with current acquaintances. So they'll go back, straight back to having an affiliative bond with these individuals. And the paper that was published just a couple of weeks ago in Current Biology showed that social information might be important to these birds, at least because what they do with it is they use it to manipulate their social world. So you end up with these pair bonds of ravens observing their social environment, seeing other pairs of individuals who aren't yet bonded but are coming together and acting in a friendly manner, potentially with the idea that they will be bonded in the future. And what the pair-bonded individuals do is they intervene. They come over, they direct aggression towards these individuals, they make them move away from the location where they're at. So potentially, putatively stopping a future pair bond between others. So this might be a form of competition. If you're in a pair bond, you're better able to hold a territory to find food. And so if I stop you from having that type of relationship, then me and my pair bond will probably do better. So they're using social information to manipulate their social environments, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, there's a reason for this. So it goes even further than that. Social information is so important in primates, at least, that we have areas of our brain that are specialized to deal with it. In particular, we have areas of our brains that are specialized to deal with faces. So you immediately recognize the picture of the Queen of England. She looks very stoic, but there's information in her face in the form of her identity. If she were less stoic, she might be smiling or she might be scowling, and then we would have information perhaps about her mood or her future intentions. And the same is true in primates. So this is a monkey called 78T. So similarly, to me anyway, there's information about her identity encoded in her face. And monkeys also use facial gestures to communicate with each other. They have a series of ritualized gestures that they use that indicate submission or threat or affiliation. And what's quite cool is that if you are a neurobiologist and you look at the brain, so these are pictures of the brain on their side but kind of squished. The authors did that for visualization. And you look at the bits of the brain that are active when in the process of processing faces. And there are certain areas, specific areas that light up. So here in the human brain, all of the yellow blobs are areas that light up when processing faces. And the monkey brains are actually flipped around, but are they? No, it's just my inability to look at spatial orientations. Anyway, so the monkey brains, there are similar parts of the brain, particularly here. It's very small on the screen, I know, but this is called the facial fusiform area. And they're in very similar parts of the brain as in humans. And basically, these are specialized areas of both monkey and human brain that allow us to process faces and the information contained within them. Right? So social information goes so far as to be important as our brains are specialized to deal with it. Now, moving on to more of the biochemical basis of friendship, we know friendship is good for us, at least in other animals. It leads to reproductive success, it leads to survival. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do something just because it's good for us, right? There are lots of things that are good for us, eating kale, but we don't necessarily do it, right? So we need something to motivate us to do these types of behaviors. And the thing that potentially motivates us to interact with others in a friendly fashion, to form friendship, is actually the stress response. So the stress response, we all know about stress. It makes us feel bad, but it also kind of motivates us to do things, because if you're stressed, you're likely to work towards alleviating whatever the source of stress is. So the stress response is a great motivator in animals. And what's been shown in rhesus macaques and baboons and a few other primates is grooming, so this glue of social bonding in primates, is relaxing. If you receive grooming from somebody else, your cortisol, your stress hormone levels go way down. But also if you give grooming to somebody else, your cortisol levels go down too. So grooming, forming social bonds in primates seems to be relaxing, and this might be a motivator to form those bonds. There's another chemical that you've probably heard of called oxytocin. Oxytocin gets a lot of press as the love hormone and all these things. I like to point out that oxytocin does all sorts of stuff, including it's involved in urination, it's involved in all sorts of things that aren't necessarily what you might think of when you think of the love hormone. But actually, the main function, and we think the primary reason oxytocin, well, the primary function of oxytocin in evolutionary terms, is it's involved in the letdown of milk in lactating mothers. So you release oxytocin, you release milk, you feed your baby. And we think that this has to, well, it helps with the process of bonding a mother to her infant. Mothers are pretty bonded to their infants already, but the process of lactation, if you talk to mothers while they're lactating, you should ask them how they feel, because it's kind of interesting. They often will report feeling a bit sleepy, a bit stoned even, 10, 15 minutes after lactation. They feel really good. And that's oxytocin acting on their brains. It's relaxing them. It's making them feel good about their baby, feel good about the interaction they've just had. So the funny thing about evolution is that it often co-opts things that it's already invented for other purposes. And we think that oxytocin is along these lines too, because humans, when you touch somebody or you give somebody a hug, you release a little bit of oxytocin. So it feels good to do these behaviors, just like it feels good to have a bond between a mother and a baby. And this is true in chimpanzees and rhesus macaques too. So when they interact in affiliative ways, when they touch each other, they also get a little hit of oxytocin. So they're also feeling a little bit more relaxed, a little bit happier. So again, we have a chemical motivating us to interact with others, and it's a common chemical. Oxytocin is actually very ancient. You can find it, or forms of it, in all vertebrates. It's a very ancient chemical motivating us to interact with others. Now, the last sort of bit of the story of what motivates us to engage in social interactions has a genetic component to it. So it's a bit tricky to maybe think about how genes might directly influence behavior. But the logic for how this might happen is really quite simple. It has to do with small genetic variation. So here we just have a gene, and this gene makes a protein. So all the chemicals we've been talking about are, of course, simply proteins. So this protein we're going to call protein A. And then we have the exact same gene, which has a tiny variation to it. I don't know why I made it red. I shouldn't have, because there are only 4 base pairs. But anyway, It's a tiny red variation to this gene. So it's the same gene, and it still produces protein A, but it's protein A with a star, because protein A with a star is slightly different from regular protein A. It's got a little hole in it, its shape is slightly different, it's polarized a bit differently. And what that means is that this version of protein A is slightly less good at whatever its job is. So it has a job, but it's not as good as regular version of protein A. So we can talk about this in more concrete terms, and we can talk about the serotonin pathway. So similar to oxytocin, serotonin is a neuromodulator, so it influences brain function. Quite simply, serotonin is specifically thought to be involved in processes of mood regulation and memory. So we think it's quite important when it comes to social behaviors. But serotonin, of course, it's not just one gene, it's a whole series of genes. So we can talk about it as a pathway, because you have genes that lead to the production of serotonin, and you have genes that shuttle serotonin around in your brain. So like this one, the serotonin transporter, it's something that shuttles serotonin around once it's been released. And so we can have the regular genetic version of serotonin transporter, and then we can have our slightly different version of the serotonin transporter that is slightly less good at doing whatever it is that it does, well, at moving serotonin around between the synapses. Well, yeah, within a synapse anyway. So what I've done is I've looked at the role of these genetic variants in some of my monkey data. So we go back to my social network. Everybody's just gray now, but remember the individuals in the center have the bigger shapes and are more connected to others. And it's still just the regular grooming network we looked at before. And I looked at 2 genetic variants in that serotonin pathway. So 2 versions of serotonin genes, where you have the version that is the high functioning version, or the normal functioning version if you like, and then 2 versions that are slightly less good. And when I plot the genotypes of the animals in my social network on here, so the ones that are slightly less good at serotonergic signaling because they have these 2 gene variants, so they're the red ones, you can see they're towards the periphery of the social network, and they actually figure quite highly in amongst those monkeys that didn't have any grooming partners whatsoever. So this is a bit telling. So these individuals who have poor serotonergic signaling appear to be at least slightly less social than others. And this could be for a number of reasons. As I said, serotonin is involved in the regulation of mood and memory, so perhaps this impacts upon your ability to interact with others. But it's also one of these reward mechanisms. So the release of serotonin is fairly rewarding. So perhaps these individuals don't find social interactions as rewarding as do other monkeys. Okay, so then what have we learned? So far we've learned that other animals have friendship, exhibit the types of relationships that I've defined as friendship anyway. We've learned that friendship helps other animals survive and helps them to reproduce. We've shown that other animals care about social information and are even willing to pay for it, and have specialized areas of their brain that deal with this information. We've learned that there are a series of biochemical processes that motivate and regulate and maintain social relationships, and these chemicals are the same in people and at least other primates, but also a few other animals. And this goes all the way down to the level of our genes, and we can explain differences in affiliative behavior between individuals at the genetic level, at least in part. But we still have one really, really big question to answer. We can talk all day long about the fact that it seems like friendship evolved, and we can talk about its molecular basis, but that is very different from answering the question of what are friends for. So why did friendship evolve? We still haven't answered that question. And actually, we don't know the answer to that question. So that is a question that is open, and one that I am myself and others are working towards answering, because this is something that we all do. It really pervades our social lives. We feel like it's important just as people, but we don't know what it's for. We don't know why it evolved. So I have a theory, which I don't know if it's right, but it's just my idea, which is, at very least, we can think about friendship is about cooperation, right? You interact with individuals in a friendly manner, but often it's about helping other people. And my idea is that friendship is beyond simple favors. It's something you need to form relationships with others so that when you need a big favor, you have those individuals there for you. So my little analogy is if someone lends you €5, or in this picture, $5, because I was in the States when I took the picture. If they're a stranger, you feel like you have to pay that person back right away. Probably, most people would. And they would probably expect that you pay them back right away. But if that person's a very good friend of yours, they'd probably say, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Pay me back another time, buy me a drink, something. It's not a big deal. And you probably yourself would feel like, yeah, it's okay. I don't really have to pay them back right away. No problem. And I think this is meaningful, because I think it shows us how we think about our relationships differently. And I think it hints at the fact that we have friends, we care about them, but we do rely on them for things. But we rely on them for the bigger picture things. So when something, somewhat mildly terrible goes wrong in your life, you lose your job, somebody in your family gets ill, your friends are there to support you. So your friends help you. And of course, it's when I tell this to people, they think, oh, well, that doesn't sound very nice. It doesn't make me feel very warm. It seems a bit, capitalistic, if anything. And I'll give them that. But then I like to think about animals. And this is how other animals interact, right? We know that their friends help them survive and reproduce. We don't know how, but we know their friends help them survive and reproduce. So these exchanges with our friends are helping us survive and reproduce. And that isn't really capitalistic. That's really quite nice. So I think, well, I hope anyway, to have convinced you that I've answered the question about whether or not friendship is a uniquely human trait, and convinced you that it is not. And that therefore I have indeed shown that this quote isn't true, and in fact, to me anyway, as a primatologist, it's quite obvious that of course an animal doesn't itch its flank against a tree, it asks another monkey to groom it. So, with that, I just wanted to thank, again, the organizers for inviting me, and to thank all my research assistants over the years. Sometimes they're a bit goofy, but most of the time they're quite serious, and the people at my field site in Puerto Rico, and my many academic colleagues, and Mosaic Films for the video footage. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you for this really nice talk, what we've learned about friendship and monkeys. It's before we close, it's time for questions. Are there any questions from the audience? There's a question over there.
Oh.
Hi. Thanks for your lecture. How do you measure the serotonin level when you said animals have that the same as humans? How do you measure that?
Well, so they have the same genetic variation as humans. So the pathway is the same. So all the different component parts are the same. There are proteins that lead to serotonin. And there are the same proteins that shuttle serotonin around in the brain, and the same receptors on the ends of synapses that take up serotonin and cause action potentials. So those are all the same. Actually, the neuroanatomy of a Rhesus macaque and a human is very, very similar. And if we genotype humans and Rhesus macaques, the genetic variants are not necessarily the same, but often homologous. So you have a genetic variation in the promoter of a serotonin gene, and it's in one place in a human and another slightly different place in a Rhesus macaque, but still it's a variant in a promoter of the same serotonin gene.
Okay, but then it's biologically the animal and the human is the same, the same pathway. But how do you measure that the serotonin is associated with the hugging and the friendship? How do you
Oh, right.
They both have that at the same action, hugging or whatever, a social thing. But how do you associate that with?
Right. So actually, the serotonergic work is largely genetic. So there are biophysical, biochemical studies that show that certain gene variants are less good at their job. And then when we map those genetic variants in an animal, then we already know what the genetic variant does from those biochemical studies. So we can then say, well, we know roughly that this gene variant is less good at its job. So when I see that this animal has this gene variant, then I can infer that this is how it maps onto social relationships. But what you're talking about is the oxytocin result, and that is based on actual levels of oxytocin in the individuals. So you can do experiments, So you can do experiments in humans, for example. You can put them in all sorts of situations. You can have them interacting with a stranger, and then have them interacting with their partner, for example, or with a friend, and you can measure levels of oxytocin in their saliva. And in non-humans, you can also get salivary oxytocin levels, but you can also measure oxytocin levels in the blood, and in some species in the urine. So you can do not necessarily, you can do experiments if they're captive. In the wild, it's a bit more difficult, but you basically get samples from individuals that you're currently observing, and you can map up their social tendencies or their social relationships with their levels of, their actual physical levels of oxytocin.
So you test that after some time you've seen them interacting, and then you test their blood or their urine.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you.
That's convenient. My question would be more psychological or social psychological. When you plot the social relationships, it's almost a sociometer kind of approach. And to what extent, you mentioned the hierarchies differ. So to what extent the power, or let's say the rank, would explain to what extent they're socially connected with others. And perhaps kinship bonds as well. So these two factors would maybe...
So both are important. It's a very good question. So both are important, and I always control for all of those things in my analyses because they are so important to at least old world primates. Their dominance rank, they have a very strict linear dominance hierarchy, and it determines all sorts of things, including how many babies they have. So the higher ranking individuals do tend to be in the center of the social network. But actually, if you look at the regression line, it's not that impressive. It's like an R-squared of 0.2, 0.3 or something. So it's not explaining much of the variation. And the same with the number of kin. So the number of kin you have, the number of close family members you have explains particularly the females, not so much in the males, because the males don't live with their family. They disperse to new groups. So especially the females, how many family members they have determines a little bit, a medium level of how much they interact, but it doesn't explain all of the variation. Yeah.
Let's stay connected to this more or less. What about, you said about there is a relationship between the level of oxytocin and the reproduction rate, right? What about the life expectancy?
Life expectancy. Life expectancy hasn't, as far as I'm aware, been done, and in part because most of these studies are on large-bodied mammals, and their life expectancy is, not longer than a person's research career, but almost. So we're getting there in terms of field-based data so that we will be able to answer that question very soon, but it hasn't been answered yet.
We humans are very much interested in that, right?
Oh, in humans.
Yeah, but so...
and so in humans, a lot of the studies have focused on sort of health-based outcomes. So your likelihood of developing heart disease, for example, is related to how connected you are to your, how many friends you have, basically, how many individuals you name as friends. And basically, it's a lot of it has to do with how likely you are to get sick. But there is one study that has to do with life expectancy in humans, but I'm just not exactly remembering the data at the minute. But I could tell you later, probably, if you emailed me.
And I have a question that's also related to this genetic compound, so the serotonin levels. So what would happen if you give these animals medication? And so do they start to hug suddenly, and what will happen with their social network then?
I don't know. It's a very good question. We could probably manipulate them if we asked very nicely, but I wouldn't want to because I have other studies ongoing that this would, of course, disrupt those other studies.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's a very good question because, ideally we would be able to manipulate and see what the impact of that would be. Yeah.
And the minor question, these genes are homozygous or heterozygous, these variants?
Oh, the variants. So the individuals that were the variants had had a minor allele for both. So they could be both. They could be homozygous for both. They could be heterozygous for both, or homozygous for one and heterozygous for the other. But they didn't have all major alleles, basically. Yeah.
There's a question.
Yeah, guys, I don't hope this will happen to you, but we know that humans are able to pretend friendship for some personal benefits. Do the animals do it as well?
Can animals do it as well? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, of course, as human observers, we might not know, because we would just code it, we only see the external. We don't know what the intentions of the animals are, so we only see their external interactions, right? So to me, if I'm following my Rhesus macaques around, somebody's just pretending to be friends with someone else, it might look like a real friendship as me, the human observer, even if the monkey's intentions are bad. But that's some pretty high-level forethought manipulation going on, and I don't know if any primate other than humans is capable of doing that. Be interesting.
Yeah, it's just because humans have, they also have very blurred lines between, friendship and the factor that you actually, I guess you excluded this from your definition of friendship, the, sexual aspect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I excluded it. It's partly, again, simply because it's difficult as a researcher who's trying to generalize particularly across many species. You can't ask a monkey, well, you have a sexual relationship with that female, but you also feel like she's your friend outside of that. You can't really ask them that. So we just exclude it for simplicity. But I think actually probably spouses, I would say, can be friends, even though they have a sexual relationship. But I think that you could also qualify that as a friendship relationship because it goes beyond purely reproduction, right?
This is more or less in line of her questions, but isn't that exactly why your definition of friendship is maybe a little bit too narrow for human friendship? Because the friendship, as you define it, or as you describe it also with these monkeys, is very unequal. The friendly relationships, and they're very manipulative, as I may say so. And in humans, there's also, of course, playing, but I think in humans the relationships are far more equal than in the group you're describing.
Oh, I don't think I said that monkey relationships were manipulative and unequal. They're quite equal. It's part of my definition. It has to be bidirectional. It can't just be all one way. The monkey relationships are bidirectional.
Your scheme, you see that in the center, the higher, more powered animals are sitting, and they have more relationships, or more or less more relationships.
Some individuals have more relationships, but they're dyadic relationships. That's the whole network. Their relationship with each pair of those individuals is a friendly one, it's an affiliative one, and it's a bidirectional one.
Okay, well, okay, thank you.
But can you also imagine that
my data, I think I know.
Also other social behavior like kissing or whatever? I don't know what monkeys do, but so that you make a map based on kissing and that you do get the same map? Or can you have a different map for the kissing or for mating or for whatever? You certainly have a different map for mating. You certainly have a different map for aggression. But they do other pro-social things. So they
feed next to each other, so they tolerate each other at food resources. They simply just spend time sitting next to each other. They exchange affiliative vocalizations with each other, so they have certain sounds that we know are associated with affiliation. That one actually maps quite closely to the grooming network, because what happens often is I'll make an affiliative sound to you as I'm approaching you, and then I'll start grooming you. Or I'll ask you to groom me by kind of leaning towards you and saying, okay. So those two actually end up mapping on quite nicely to each other.
Okay. There's a question over here.
Well, first of all, thank you for the lecture. My question is, you had the social network, and then there were a lot of ones in the periphery. Did you notice any distress when studying their behavior? Like some people, in humans, some people feel distressed by not being part of a social group, while others are perfectly happy with that. Did you notice the difference between different kinds of animals, primates, who were not that popular?
Yeah, there's certainly some individuals who seem, and this is totally anecdotal, but from observing them for a very long time, who seem to avoid social situations, so seem to be on their own a lot, and it seems like if they get into grooming with somebody else, they initiate the ending of that grooming. They'll kind of walk away. Yeah, well, I've had enough, and they'll go off on their own, and they're just on their own a lot. And they are not necessarily low-ranking monkeys. Some of them are, middle or even high-ranking. They seem to just be a bit disengaged from it. And yeah, what's going on in their head, I have no idea. But it seems to be that it's an avoidance strategy. I mean, society is difficult. It's hard to be right in the middle of the social network, even though these are friendly interactions going on. If you're in the middle of the social network, there's also lots of politics and lots of aggression, and just like people, some individuals like to just not be involved. Yeah.
Autism. Are these monkeys, would you consider them as autistic?
No. But I mean, it's funny you ask, because the National Institutes of Health fund my research because we are effectively trying to work out some of the genetic variation that underlies social differentiation, and it is in fact an autism grant. So we've got money from the National Institutes of Health because there's this variation in monkeys. Some are very social, some are not social. There's genetic variation that maps onto human genetic variation. And so rather than studying rats in a lab, which tends to be a lot of biomedical work having to do with social behavior, at least, which is fantastic, but also has certain limitations, particularly when it comes to naturalistic expression of variation in something as complicated as social behavior. So yeah, that's actually why we're funded, is to study autism. But the monkeys don't have autism, but they do have a natural variation in social tendencies.
Okay, so and probably you don't have any ideas about the selection processes of who is grooming who, why, who is becoming a friend.
Yeah, no.
That would be very interesting, of course.
Yeah. I mean, if I had infinite time and money, I would start off with baby monkeys and follow them throughout their lives to really look at the ontogeny of their social relationships. And yeah, yeah, it would be fantastic.
Very interesting.
They're just too long-lived. I need a shorter-lived study species.
Because they all look the same. Okay.
So my question is more in evolutionary terms. This pattern of relationship between serotonin and friendship levels or social, non-social levels, is that observed too in the Asian populations?
Of Rhesus macaques, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't know. So there are the two biggest and best characterized Rhesus macaques are the ones of Indian origin and the ones of Chinese origin. And actually they have some genetic differences between them. So we have the Rhesus macaque genome. It was published in a while ago. I forget the date. But that was Indian origin Rhesus macaque, and the Chinese origin from the genetic work that has gone on, that they're slightly different. And there are, unfortunately, it's kind of funny, I didn't mention this, but the reason I study these kind of weird Rhesus macaques that live in Puerto Rico is because there aren't currently any long-term Rhesus macaque field sites in Asia. or anywhere. So in the wild, where, well, because rhesus macaques are a bit funny. They're one of these urbanized species, much like foxes. So they live in very urban areas. So finding a wild rhesus macaque site isn't easy. But yeah, unfortunately, no one studies them in China, so, or the other areas of Southeastern Asia where they live. So we can't really answer that question. I'd like to ask it, but yeah.
Because I was thinking, like, maybe how this allele persisted through time in this population if friendship leads to non-fitness or less fitness.
Well, that's the question, right? So that's the big question is if it's good to be friendly, why do we have this variation? Right? Everyone should just be maximally friendly. I think part of the answer to it, and this is not a genetic answer, but part of the answer to it is social suppression. So they live in these societies with dominant hierarchies. Dominant individuals can kind of make you stop doing whatever it is they want to make you stop doing. So you might be a low-ranking monkey and really social, really want to interact with others, but you're oppressed by your competitors, because that's a good strategy. Being social is a good strategy. So if I'm high-ranking, I'm going to stop you from doing that. So that's, I think, partly why we get the genetic or why we get the behavioral variation. It doesn't answer the question as to why we would see the genetic variation. You probably shouldn't see that if that were the answer. So what has to be going on there is that there are other strategies. I mean, serotonin doesn't just relate to affiliative behavior. It links to all sorts of different types of behaviors. So I think particularly serotonin links into social information and vigilance type behaviors also, so anxiety levels and things. I think there are certain situations where having those alleles that are lower functioning, where you might perhaps be an anxious monkey, actually in certain situations would be a good thing. If you're living in an environment with loads of predators or a really unstable environment, being really attuned to information in your environment, being a bit anxious might be a good thing. So we might have disruptive selection maintaining the genetic variation.
That's not the case of monkeys in Puerto Rico, right? Because they don't.
Yeah, but they've only been there for 10 generations. Yeah, so it's not enough time to have weeded it out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no more questions, again, I would like to thank you for your wonderful talk. I've learned a lot. I found it very intriguing. Yeah, and we have a book for you. And this is the book. It's from our famous writer Willem Frederik Hermans. You may have heard about him, maybe not, but it's Beyond Sleep, and he certainly didn't have time to groom it on his trip. So. So it's a very nice book in the north of Norway, and if you have time, you should visit that place. Yeah?
Oh, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Go home, all of you, and groom. Start grooming at home.